Picture a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon. Two trucks pull up to adjacent pumps. One is a brand new pickup, the paint still showing that showroom shine. A temporary tag in the back window because it's only 3 weeks old. The other is beat up, a decade old at least. A long crack running across the windshield, mismatched hubcaps. The kind of truck you'd guess belongs to someone who's had a rough few years. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Which driver is more likely to have $1 million sitting quietly in a brokerage account? If you guessed a shiny new truck, you'd be betting against the actual research. Researchers who spend years studying real, self-made millionaires, not celebrities, not inherited fortunes. Actual people who built their net worth from scratch found something that keeps surprising people every time it comes up. Fewer than a quarter of them were driving a car from the current model year. The single most common brands in their driveways weren't German or Italian, they were Toyota, Honda, and Ford. The same brands you'd find in any ordinary parking lot in America. The average millionaire's car, according to more recent research on the subject, is about 4 years old with somewhere around 40,000 miles already on the odometer. Meanwhile, the person who leased that shiny new truck 3 weeks ago might be earning a perfectly respectable income and still be 400 away from a financial emergency turning into a financial catastrophe, because the truck payment, at several $100s a month, is already spoken for before the paycheck even lands. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly enough. The version of wealth we're all trained to recognize: the fast car, the fresh sneakers, the vacation photos, isn't actually a measurement of wealth at all. It's a measurement of cash flow, and often, it's a measurement of debt. You cannot tell, by looking at what someone owns, whether you're looking at a person who has money or a person who is spending money they don't have to look like they do. The two situations can be visually identical, and that's precisely the trap. Let's actually run the math on this. Because the gap between looks rich and is rich isn't some vague vibe at arithmetic, and once you see the arithmetic, the whole illusion collapses. Say two people, same job, same $70,000 salary, both drive to work every day. One leases a new vehicle for $650 a month, a completely normal, unremarkable amount for a decent new car these days once you include insurance on a newer vehicle. The other buys reliable 4-year-old car with cash, spends maybe $80 a month on average upkeep and the slightly higher insurance a used car sometimes carries, and takes the leftover $570 a month and puts it into a simple investment account instead. Nothing dramatic. No stock picking, no crypto, nothing that requires a personality change. Just automatic, boring, monthly investing. At a 7% average annual return, that $570 a month, left alone, turns into a bit over $99,000 in 10 years. In 20 years, it's past $290,000. In 30 years, which, let's be honest, is a completely normal amount of time to still be working, it's crossed $700,000. The lease driver, over that same 30 years, has made roughly the same total dollar outlay. But every single one of those dollars went to a vehicle that was worth nothing the moment they walked away from it, replaced every few years by another lease, another payment, another car that depreciated the instant it left the lot. 30 years of driving nicer cars versus 30 years of driving decent, unremarkable cars, and the difference in outcome isn't a rounding error. It's the difference between working until 68 out of necessity and having a genuine choice about it. Same income, same amount of money moving through their hands every month. Wildly different destination, and the entire fork in the road was one recurring decision that most people never even register as a decision. It just feels like, this is what a car payment costs now. Here's a statistic that should stop you in your tracks. According to a recent Goldman Sachs survey, roughly 40% of American workers earning over $300,000 a year say they're living paycheck to paycheck. Read that twice. This isn't a story about people who can't make ends meet, because ends meet is a genuinely difficult target for them. This is a substantial share of a group earning nearly 4 times the national median household income. and nearly half of them still feel like they're one bad month away from trouble. Something other than income is clearly driving that feeling, and the researchers pointed to exactly the mechanism described above, what gets called lifestyle creep, where luxuries quietly graduate into felt necessities as income rises, until the gap between earning a lot and having a lot has been fully absorbed by a standard of living that expanded to match. A high income doesn't inoculate you against this. If anything, it gives the treadmill more room to run. Because there's more income available to be silently converted into obligations before anyone notices the conversion happening. I want to be careful here, because it would be dishonest to pretend this is purely a story about willpower. And it's definitely not a story about everyone secretly being able to afford a Tesla driving lifestyle if they just tried harder. Rent, groceries, healthcare, and childcare have all climbed faster than paycheck for a lot of people over the last several years. And a real number of families genuinely are stretched thin on necessities, not luxuries. That's a real constraint, not an excuse, and I'm not going to pretend it away. But there's a separate specific phenomenon happening at every income level, from the person barely getting by to the person clearing six figures. And it deserves its own name, because once you can name it, you can actually see it operating in your own life. It's called the hedonic treadmill. Psychologists who study happiness and well-being have found, over and over, in study after study, that humans adapt astonishingly fast to almost any improvement in their circumstances. You get a raise, and for a few weeks it feels incredible. Then your brain quietly recalibrates what normal means. And the new income starts to feel like the baseline it always was, not because anything went wrong, but because that's simply how human psychological adaptation works. The apartment that felt like a huge upgrade 6 months ago starts to feel merely adequate. The car that felt exciting to drive off the lot starts to feel like just your car. This isn't a character flaw unique to people who overspend. It's the standard operating system of a human brain. And it's precisely why lifestyle upgrades so rarely deliver the lasting satisfaction they promise on the way in. The treadmill doesn't care how fast you run. It just moves the baseline to match you, every single time. And you end up in exactly the same place emotionally, except now with a bigger monthly obligation attached to staying there. Here's where it gets genuinely dangerous rather than just mildly disappointing. Because the treadmill resets your sense of enough so quickly. A raise that should be an opportunity to build real wealth often gets absorbed entirely into upgraded spending before you even notice it happened. Move from a $60,000 salary to an $80,000 salary. And if your rent, your car, and your general lifestyle quietly climb to match, you can end up working just as hard, earning meaningfully more, and still having nothing extra to show for it. 5 years later, not because you did anything reckless, but because you let your cost of living do exactly what cost of living does when nobody's actively managing it, which is expand to fill whatever space you give it. There's a specific number that matters more here than almost anything else. And it's not your income, and it's not your net worth, it's the gap between them. The distance between what comes in and what goes out is the only thing that can actually be converted into future wealth, because the gap is the raw material compounding needs to work with. A person earning $200,000 a year who spends $195,000 of it has a smaller gap, and therefore a slower path to real financial security, than a person earning $65,000 who spends $50,000. Income determines how large your gap could theoretically be. It says almost nothing about how large your gap actually is. And it's the actual gap, not the theoretical one, that ends up sitting in an account 30 years from now. There's a useful way to think about this that goes beyond simple frugality. Every person carries two separate financial identities that most people never bother distinguishing. There's the visible identity, the one built out of what other people can see, priced by the square footage of your apartment, the badge on your car, the resort tags on your luggage. And there's the invisible identity, the one that shows up only on a balance sheet nobody else ever looks at, built from what you own free and clear. What's compounding quietly in accounts you never mention at dinner? These two identities can move in completely opposite directions at the same time. And for a lot of people chasing the first one, that's exactly what's happening. The visible identity is climbing while the invisible one is being slowly hollowed out to pay for it. The tragedy isn't that people want the visible identity. Wanting to be seen and to enjoy nice things is completely normal and human. The tragedy is that almost nobody is ever taught that the two identities compete for the same limited pool of dollars. So people build the visible one without realizing they're doing it at the direct expense of the invisible one. Dollar for dollar, month after month for years. Until one day the difference between the two becomes impossible to ignore, usually at the worst possible moment. Like a layoff, a medical bill, or the sudden realization in your 50s that retirement is a lot closer than the invisible identity is ready for. Now, here's the part that I think explains why quiet, unglamorous wealth building often produces people who don't advertise what they have. And it's not because they're hiding anything shady, it's simpler and more practical than that. Once you've internalized that every dollar spent on visible status is a dollar pulled out of a compounding machine before it ever got the chance to grow, the entire appeal of visible status starts to look different. It stops looking like a reward and starts looking like a cost. The same way a chain smoker who's quit for good stops seeing a cigarette as a treat and starts seeing it as a threat. People who've made this mental shift genuinely don't experience much internal pull toward flashy spending. Not because they're exercising heroic self-control every day, but because the framing has flipped. The car, the watch, the vacation photos, none of it disappeared as a source of pleasure. But it got recategorized from reward for success to expense that competes with the thing I actually want, which is usually something quieter, not having to worry, not having to work past a certain age. Being able to help a kid or a parent without flinching at the number. This reframe also explains something people find counterintuitive when they first hear it. Genuinely wealthy people often talk about money less, not more, than people who are stretched thin and performing comfort. When your financial situation is actually stable, money stops being an active source of anxiety competing for your attention. So it naturally recedes from conversation the same way you don't spend your day thinking about the fact that you have enough oxygen. It's the people in financial distress, or people spending heavily to maintain an image, who tend to think about money constantly, even while trying hard not to show it because there's a gap between the story their spending is telling and the story their bank account actually reflects. And holding that gap open takes real, continuous mental effort. So if the visible signals, the car, the clothes, the highlight reel are essentially useless for judging real financial health, and can actively mislead you into either envying people who are drowning in debt or underestimating people who are quietly secure. What should you actually be paying attention to in your own life? That isn't just another vague platitude about saving more. Start with the gap, because it's the one number that converts directly into your future. You don't need a complicated spreadsheet, you need one honest number, what you earned last month, minus what you spent, expressed as a percentage. That number, tracked over time, tells you more about your actual trajectory than your salary, your job title, or anything you post online ever could. Then take the race seriously before your lifestyle does. The single highest leverage moment to build real wealth isn't when you're already comfortable. It's in the narrow window right after your income goes up, before your spending has had time to quietly renegotiate what normal means. If you get a raise and root even half of the increase straight into savings or investments before it ever touches your checking account, you get to enjoy some of the upgrade while still growing the gap that actually builds your future. Let all of it flow into lifestyle, and the raise, for wealth-building purposes, might as well not have happened. Notice when a purchase is meant to be seen rather than used. And don't treat that as automatically wrong, treat it as a category that deserves a decision, not a reflex. There's nothing broken about occasionally spending on something purely because it feels good to own the word you show. The trouble starts when the category quietly becomes the majority of your spending without you ever consciously choosing it, which is exactly how it tends to happen, one small upgrade at a time. Each one individually reasonable, collectively enormous. Get comfortable being underestimated. This is less a financial tip and more a psychological permission slip. But it matters if your car, your apartment, or your wardrobe doesn't broadcast success, and someone quietly assumes you're behind. That assessment says nothing about your actual trajectory. The gas station comparison from the top of this piece isn't a fluke or a cute anecdote, it's a reliably documented pattern. And it holds precisely because most people never stop to question what visible spending is actually evidence of. And finally, measure your progress against your own gap from a year ago, never against someone else's highlight reel. The coworker with the new SUV, the friend toasting from a resort. You are seeing a single frame of their financial life, stripped of any context about what it cost them, how it was financed, or what it's quietly costing them in flexibility 10 years from now. It's not a fair comparison because you don't have the information to make it fair, and treating it as one only pressures you into decisions engineered to close a gap that might not even be real. None of it requires becoming someone who never enjoys their money. That's not the goal. And frankly, a life built entirely around deprivation rarely sticks anyway. It requires something much narrower, noticing that the version of rich you were handed by advertising and social media is a picture of spending, not a picture of wealth, and that the two can look identical from the outside while being complete opposites underneath. The truck at the gas station with the cracked windshield isn't a sad story by default. Sometimes it's just a truck, but often enough to matter, often enough real researchers keep finding the same pattern study after study. It's parked next to a mortgage-free house and a retirement account most people twice the driver's income will never catch up to precisely because nobody was ever supposed to notice.